just a second. Awesome. Let's get going. Lots of good content here this afternoon. So welcome everyone to this virtual meetup for Tableau and DBT users. A little bit of housekeeping before we get going. We have 3 separate presenters today. If you have any questions for any of the panelists, then please use the Q&A throughout this first section of the meetup. We'll endeavour to answer those questions probably towards the end, but please use the Q&A for that because the chat can sometimes get a little bit busy. Quick introduction to myself. Hi everyone, I am Alex Ross. I'm a distinguished solution engineer with Tableau. I've been with Tableau now for getting on for 8 years, held a variety of roles within our solution engineering organization. And why did I choose to host this event? Why did I think this was something that might resonate with the community? Well, I'm spending an increasing amount of my time talking to Tableau customers about how they strike this balance between governance and self-service analytics. And I really feel that bringing Tableau and DBT together can provide organizations and our customers with the best of both worlds. So that's why I'm really excited to talk about this topic this afternoon. So by way of agenda, this is what it looks like. So I'm going to spend the first 10 minutes or so doing a quick introduction and share with you my perspective and my point of view as to why using Tableau together with DBT is so powerful. I'm then going to hand over to Alan. Alan is from Tails.com. He's an active member of the DBT community, a Tableau user as well. And he's going to talk to you about how Tails are using both Tableau and DBT and some of the best practices and challenges that they've seen using the two together. We have Bizstory, who are a Tableau partner in EMEA, one of our leading partners in EMEA, who are going to talk to us about why they've chosen to partner with DBT. Bizstory have been a long-standing partner of Tableau. They also partner with Snowflake and Fivetran, and they more recently made the choice to partner with DBT as well. And logistics permitting, we've had some challenges this afternoon. We'll then go into some breakout sessions. So one of the things I'm really keen to get out of this afternoon is for you guys to meet each other, to meet your peers, to talk about how you're using Tableau and DBT together and what you might want to see in the future from the two companies. So that's what our agenda looks like this afternoon. So let me jump into my perspective and my point of view. I'll start just by saying thank you very much for investing your time this afternoon and the enthusiastic responses that I've had from various people in the community about organizing this event. And looking at the number of people that have joined, it's certainly exceeded my expectation, which just shows the level of interest that there is in this topic. And both Tableau and DBT are well known for their passionate community. So bringing those two communities together, I can only begin to imagine how much passion and excitement there's going to be once we get these two amazing communities together. So let me spend a couple of minutes just level setting about what is Tableau and what is DBT. I want to make sure that we have a common baseline because I appreciate that some of you that are on the call this afternoon might know one technology or might be more familiar with more than one product than the other. So DBT has quickly become the standard way to perform the transformation as part of an ELT process. It doesn't extract or load the data, but it's extremely good at transforming the data that already exists in your cloud data warehouse. And this transform after load architecture, known as ELT, is becoming increasingly common. And one of the reasons that it's becoming increasingly common is because of cloud data warehouses like Snowflake, BigQuery, Redshift, that are extremely performant and scalable, and also cheap to store your data. And it's really that separation of the compute and storage that means there's fewer and fewer reasons to execute your data pipelines as though you would have done in the kind of old world of BI, where you're doing ETL and doing that transformation before you land the data in your data warehouse. And DBT really is the tool that helps you to write and execute those data transformation jobs that you then run inside your cloud data warehouse. And its only real function is to take the code you write in DBT, compile that into SQL, and schedule and run that against your warehouse to transform data and make it ready for analytics. And with this shift to ELT, we've seen this emergence of a role called the analytics engineer, bringing software engineering best practices to the analysts. Analytics engineers are responsible for providing clean data sets and modeling data in a way that empowers the end users to answer their own question with data. And that sounds really familiar to people who are in Tableau, this concept of empowering end users and democratizing data and analytics to the masses. And in the last 5 years, I think because of the rise of cloud data warehousing and the modern data stack, we've started to see this role of the analytics engineer emerge. I've just got a snipping here in the top right from Business Insider talking about how this analytics engineer role is the kind of hottest and most in-demand job as a data practitioner at the moment. And I think the reason for that is that it's quite a unique skill set. You're not only familiar with analytics and designing dashboards and visualizations in a tool like Tableau, but you're also learning new things like Python and a Git and version control and bringing those software engineering best practices into the way that you're modeling and transforming data. So if we compare that with Tableau, Tableau is known for kind of enterprise business intelligence in many of our customers. And if we look at the spectrum of use cases for BI, on the left-hand side, we have centrally governed strategic data that needs to be centrally controlled and managed. And on the right-hand side, we have tactical data in your business where people can self-serve, drag and drop, and ask and answer their own question of data. And whilst Tableau can fulfill both these use cases, I think we'd all agree that Tableau's real strength is on the right-hand side of this spectrum, where we're empowering business users for the first time to drag and drop and be self-reliant and self-sufficient on BI. And I think if we think about DBT and its ability to transform data and govern transformations, that really aims at the left-hand side of the spectrum. So if we bring the two together, we're bringing governance on the left, combined with self-service on the right. And what does this look like from an architectural point of view? Well, if you're using DBT, then it's highly likely that you're already using a cloud data warehouse or a data lake like Snowflake, BigQuery, Redshift, Databricks to facilitate that ELT process that I talked about earlier. And that probably means that you're also embracing the modern data stack. So you might be using tools like Fivetran or Stitch for the extract and load process. You might be using other data science or machine learning capabilities, and maybe you've adopted an enterprise data catalog as well. And more likely than not, you're using DBT for those transformations within the cloud data warehouse. And on the right-hand side, we have Tableau. So Tableau is the gray box on the right, which is about providing visual self-service analytics and helping people to go through this iterative cycle of visualizations where they're asking and answering their own questions of data. So let me just double click on the Tableau box. So if we think about Tableau's place in the modern data stack and how we connect to a cloud data warehouse, if we think about best practices, it might look something like this. So in an ideal world, an ideal deployment of Tableau, we are connecting once to that cloud data warehouse, and we have introduced the concept of virtual connections that helps us centrally manage how we connect to that cloud data warehouse. We're then doing a bunch of transformation and modeling of that data, and we have a number of capabilities in Tableau that help us to do that. So we can use things like relationships or joins. We can even write some custom SQL, or we could use Tableau Prep to get that data into a shape that's ready for analysis. And hopefully, once we've done that data modeling, we create a certified published data source, which we reuse across a number of workbooks. So this picture shows an ideal deployment or strategy for using Tableau on top of our cloud data warehouse. But I think the real world often looks quite different to this. What we often see in the real world is that people are self-serving. And what that means is that they end up embedding a data source in every single workbook. So everyone is writing their own prep flows. They're writing their own custom SQL. They are building their own data models. And that becomes hard to govern. So whilst we provide some fantastic data management capabilities in Tableau, we've introduced things like virtual connections, row-level security, data cataloging. It does become a real challenge to govern these disparate data sources that start to emerge in the Tableau platform. And this, again, is why I'm excited about how we can work with DBT, because if you have an organization that's using both Tableau and DBT together, what we can do is we can actually push a lot of that data transformation and modeling up the stack. So we can push that into DBT to look after that transformation in a centralized and governed way. And we can start to take advantage of things like the version control capabilities that DBT integrates with GitHub to deploy with CI/CD processes to automate the testing and deployment of your analytical models. And we can start to benefit from the rich and comprehensive documentation and lineage information that DBT offers you. And I think without mentioning specific competitors of Tableau, it's really going to help us as Tableau to compete more effectively with some other BI tools in the market that do that centralized governed data modeling and data transformation really well. And the last thing I'm just going to mention is what the future might look like. So one thing that DBT announced at their Coalesce conference at the end of last year is this concept of the metrics layer, which is also being referred to as headless BI. And for those of you that haven't yet heard about the metrics layer, this is about defining a metric once centrally and then reusing that across multiple applications downstream. So if you think about today's architecture, very often metrics are defined in a number of applications. So you might write a calculated field in Tableau. You might write a similar formula or metric in a data science tool. You might even write it in an operational tool. And we often then end up with multiple versions of the truth. The idea with the metrics layer is we push that up the stack. So we define that metric once in a tool like DBT, and then we have downstream applications, BI tools, data science tools, operational analytics, all consuming that same definition of the metric. So it's really about divorcing this metric layer or this semantic layer from the BI tool. And this is something that DBT have announced. They're working on this at the moment, and I'm really interested to see how Tableau is going to be able to benefit from that metrics layer once it gets released and starts to be adopted in the market. Okay, so I shared with you my perspective on things. At this point, I'm going to hand over to Alan, who's going to talk to you a bit about how Tails use Tableau and DBT together.
Thanks, Alex. If you're able to make a noise, if you can see the seamless switch over to the new slides. Thanks for that, Alex. So following on from what Alex has said, I'll start with a little bit of context about who I am, why I'm here, and then go into a little bit of well, spoilers. So background, my name's Alan, head of data at Tails.com. I'm also one of the maintainers of SQL Fluff, the open source SQL linter. And we've been using DBT for about 4.5 years at Tails.com. We've also been using Tableau Server for, well, we've been using Tableau Server for 4 years and using Tableau Desktop for 6 years. And I think what's worth pulling out here before I even go any further is we've been using Tableau for longer than we've been using DBT. We didn't choose Tableau because it integrated well with DBT. We chose Tableau because it was the right tool for our organization at the stage of growth that we were at and the capabilities that it had. And I think among other themes that are going to come up in what I'm going to talk about over the next 10-15 minutes, one of the things that I think underlies this is that the tooling space in data land is moving really quickly. And this ability to have tools which work together in open ways and that you can swap in and out at different layers of your stack, I think is a really powerful concept and something that we've really tried to hold true to. And I think in referencing where we are now, DBT and Tableau are some of the tools we've been using for the longest, while we swapped out most of the others through the course of that journey. Now, practically, what does that context look like day to day within our organization, and what does DBT and Tableau look like for us? We have, as of yesterday, when I pulled these numbers out, we've got 1,306 DBT models, 837 DBT sources, 148 Tableau data sources, 1,782 published Tableau workbooks, and a 10-person data team as of this week. And I think what's important to pull out of this, and this I guess comes back to a little bit of what Alex was saying about, it's very easy to look online at documentation of what an ideal deployment looks like, but reality when it arrives is somewhat different. And this seems like almost intractable complexity. And I think that's really what I want to talk about today. And also where I think DBT and Tableau we found a way of working together with them, which helps manage that. Now, it's easy to think complexity sounds bad. We don't want that. Let's get rid of it. But I think it's worth reminding yourself that complexity is inevitable. If you are successful in your efforts as a data team, you will breed a culture which is hungry for more and more insight, more and more data, more and more visibility, more and more help with the decisions that people around you want to do. And that's not just going to drive a greater demand for more, it's going to drive a demand for a greater diversity of insight. You know, if you've been really successful in your revenue in analytics, maybe your people or your HR team is going to look for HR analytics. Maybe you're going to look for customer analytics. You're going to be looking at all kinds of stuff. And I think it's worth recognizing here that if you are successful in your data strategy, complexity will naturally want to grow. And this is a good thing, right? This is a sign of your success. However, there's a flip side here, right? Complexity is also a trap. Like managing complexity and legacy complexity doubly so takes time, effort, and resources. And that's time, effort, and resources spent managing complexity and not spent driving the thing that your organization does, whether that's impact, revenue, growth, whatever you happen to be trying to do. This unnecessary complexity can burn time, effort, and I think importantly, burn engagement. I'm going to make an assumption here that most of the people who dialed into this webinar that work within data analytics, functional teams like that, which have probably put an awful lot of effort into hiring, you know, effective, skilled, and diverse teams over the last few years. And the last thing you want to do is hire great people into your organization and burn them out through managing complexity they don't need to manage. How do we practically do this? And how can we do this on a day-to-day basis? So what practical options do you have? Well, you could resource it your team and just deal with the complexity. That sounds like the cop-out option, but I think my big caveat here is everything I'm saying is through the lens of the scale of the organization that Tails.com is. Depending on the size of your organization, the quote-unquote right level of complexity is going to be different. If you are a larger organization, you're going to typically be able and need to utilize the upsides of greater complexity. You know, you might want different access models. You might want different ways of processing data. You might want different ways of accessing and viewing data. You may, shock horror, have a wide range of BI tools, including Tableau. If you are a smaller organization, you're probably not going to get the upsides of that additional complexity. And so the optimal level of complexity for you is going to be much lower. And you're also not going to want to tolerate the additional operating costs of resourcing up to handle that complexity. Second thing you could do, and we did say that this complexity comes from innovation, you could just slow down innovation and therefore restrict the amount of complexity that gets generated on a day-to-day basis. That's not really a choice, right? You're going to need to innovate your way out of complexity, and therefore slowing down your innovation just digs you deeper into the hole. So really, either you're going to resource up for it, and that you may be restricted in that based on the size of your organization, or you're really only left with one option here, which is to constrain the direction that complexity can grow in. What do I mean by that? One model of thinking about this is around the activities that your team, or if you're not part of an analytics team, the analytics teams and data teams that you work with, what do? Well, they get hold of data, they combine it together, and they use it either to make charts or do some data science or make some predictions, whatever they happen to be doing with it. And we live and operate in a time where in some ways we're really lucky. We have a wide range of tools for doing this, right? You have so many options for how you process the raw data. You have so many options for combining data together. You have so many options for how you use it. I've picked a small snapshot of the ones that I think are available. You know, you could process stuff with Airflow or ETL stuff or DBT and Fivetran or Tableau prep or data warehouse triggers. You can do all of these things and loads more. These are just a selection of things that I've picked out based on things that I've seen before. But just because you can do all of these things doesn't mean you should do all of these things. And I think one of the big choices I would encourage everyone to do in working out how you want to use DBT and how you want to use Tableau, and particularly if you want to use them together, is where do you want to allow your team to increase complexity because it's useful and it helps you. So for example, for us, we have a lot more complexity at the top end of this, the right-hand side of the diagram. We have a diverse way of people using it. Sure, we have Tableau, but we also have data science use cases, which we're also wanting to use the same definitions for, a little bit like Alex touched on before, of reusable pieces of stuff to make sure we're not defining things in multiple places. We have a couple of custom apps for people to be able to interact with data or change the metadata. At the same time, we're wanting to restrict the complexity we generate at the higher levels of the stack by reducing the amount of options we have and having clear ways of doing things. So practically for us, when we're processing raw data, we do it in DBT. We could do it in Tableau Prep, sure, but we have made the choice to say, no, we're going to do it in DBT because that allows us to centralize it and do it in one place, which is governable, visible, transparent, and so on and so forth. At the same time, we've also chosen that instead of having a wide range of BI tools, we're going to have one. We're going to use Tableau because it gives us what we need to do. It has the capabilities we need. And sure, there are other use cases that aren't doing visualizations, but for that use case, we're going to use Tableau. And that's a way of restricting unnecessary complexity. And while that might feel constraining, in some ways what you're doing is focusing the creativity of your team into the areas that are actually going to move them forward, and taking away some of the choice paralysis that might otherwise result. So what does that actually look like as our implementation of doing this? And my caveat here is I'm going to try and explain in one slide something which is a whole presentation in of itself. There is a slightly longer version of this. If you go back to the recordings of the London DBT meetup, the manager of our insights team, Colleen Mahon, did a great presentation on this a few years ago. If you want to go back and look at the archives there. It's changed a little since then, but I think some of the intent is still here. Working up from the bottom of this diagram, we do, as Alex said, have a selection of ETL, ELT tools doing minimal transformation at the bottom. That allows us to swap them in and out. If they do funny things with pricing, it means we can tell them to go away and get a different one. We have a base layer here doing effectively just data typing, one-to-one mapping with the inflow sources, so that if we did need to swap in and out ELT or ETL tools, which there are so many of them available now, it means we can swap them in and out, and all we have to change is that base layer. We then have what we've called our marks layer, and this is a very simplified view of it, but this is where all of our meaningful transformation and logic is happening, whether that is going to get fed into a data science model, whether that's going to get fed into a Tableau workbook, whether that's going to get fed into an operational data use case. All of the aim is to centralize all of our logic into this one layer and keep it in a smaller place. Now that has a couple of effects. As Alex mentioned, we have the effects that just come from it being in DBT. It's version control. We can use pull requests to discuss changes and review them. We can add CI/CD checks to things, including whether we're going to break upstream data sources, which I'll get to in a second, or including whether it's well formatted, whether it's well linted. At the next layer up, we have what we've called a reporting layer. These effectively copy what would otherwise be in custom data sources in Tableau. And this is an area where, sure, in the short term, do we sometimes use custom SQL queries in Tableau? Of course we do, right? That does help in the short run. But in the long run, by shifting that logic out of Tableau, making the data sources in Tableau simpler, we're able to leverage some of the capabilities we get from DBT to do that. Most powerful one, well, two powerful ones we've had. One is version control, which I guess we've already touched on. The question of who changed the data source of this workbook and why does the number look different now goes away because we have a Git history to see who did change it. The other big change here is dependency catching, that we know what fields our Tableau workbooks are depending on because the query is in DBT. And if someone is changing something upstream of that, our checks will fail. And it will flag up that this change that someone's proposing is going to break a workbook, and we catch that before it happens. And that means when we get into Tableau, the data sources within Tableau are relatively quote unquote dumb. There's broadly a one-to-one mapping between Tableau data sources here and models in our reporting layer. And those reporting layers are broadly direct references or select star from whatever tables. Happy to go, I realize this was a very whistle-stop tour. Happy to go into more depth on this either in the Q&A later or feel free to reach out to me if you want some more advice on how to do this. What I guess I'm driving at here is having a consistent way of doing things is half the goal, right? The other way, and that just gives your team clarity on how to do things and not get lost in the complexity of the options. The other half is choosing a way which supports what you're trying to achieve. For us, we've achieved 4 things with this setup. One, we're building business logic in an open system, and that ensures continuity. DBT is an open ecosystem. That ensures that the not inconsiderable effort that the analytics team we have is putting into that data modeling effort is done in a place that is robust to tooling changes and diversity of tools. Second one is that all the meaningful logic is in the same place. It's visible, it's governable. The SQL in DBT can be version controlled. You can leverage pull requests and things and have a meaningful conversation about approaches and ways of doing stuff. Transformations for Tableau being in DBT makes dependencies explicit. We can catch things and make sure we don't break stuff. And lastly, it gives us the ability to leverage extracts and views in Tableau to get the best balance of latency. By using materialization, by using Tableau extracts on top of views in DBT, we get the best balance of governing dependencies, but while also getting great performance on our workbooks and the best latency trade-off that we would have had the other way around. And I guess in summary, what am I saying? So the first point of this is like managing complexity and considering legacy and complexity is regardless of your organization, I think is key to effective innovation, especially in data. And close to that, the right level of complexity is going to be different for your organization. Don't necessarily just copy what I've done if you're at a different scale. 3, there are loads of options for you for how you can have your tooling, and that means you can tune your complexity to whatever it is right for you. But just because you have lots of options doesn't mean you should use all of them. You should choose the options that work for you and consider restricting the options that you actually use to a smaller set that allow you to achieve what you need to achieve. And lastly, for us, using Tableau and DBT has offered a compelling way of getting the best out of both tools while also managing and mitigating some of that complexity growth. That's all I'm going to cover. I'm going to hand over to Paul and Carl from Bizstory next. If anybody wants to find me and talk more about some of this stuff, probably the easiest place to find me is on the DBT Slack. You can find me at Alan and Cruickshank, or the tails.com careers page is on there as well, if you want to look at that. Carl, Paul, over to you.
Thank you, Alan. I'll share my screen now. Hopefully you can all see those slides. Yeah, perfect. So so we're Bizstory. The first slide is just a bit of an intro for myself and Paul. So Paul Shirley, one of the panelists here today, is our data lead for engineering. I'm an engineering consultant at Bizstory. So a bit of context about Bizstory. So obviously Alex gave us a brief intro just to kind of reiterate some of this. We are a consultancy that covers across Belgium, Germany, Netherlands and the UK. We're sort of 75 strong at present, and predominantly we've been working closely with, in the analytical space, working closely with Tableau. We're partnered with Tableau within our ranks. We're fortunate enough to have a couple of Tableau visionaries as well. So very much this has been a successful model for us, and long may that partnership continue and grow. Over the last 12 months, though, we've been expanding our specialism, very much Paul being a catalyst for this, to look at the wider picture of data, right? So moving upstream, looking at the engineering practices, so warehousing, how you ingest, how you transform. And so it's been a very successful 12 months for us. We've partnered with Snowflake, Fivetran. In fact, we're Fivetran's Partner of the Year for the EMEA region. And most recently, we've partnered with DBT, which is obviously going to be a major part of this discussion, talking about why we chose DBT as our transform tool. When, as Alan's already walked through, there are so many options out there. But before I dive into that particular topic, it's probably worth just saying, like, you know, why in particular would we look at the data engineering side when we're typically specialists in the world of analytics? Well, I think one common scenario that occurs is you can have the best in the business when it comes to producing beautiful dashboards in Tableau. However, there is always a constraint, right? And so in a scenario where you've got well-modeled data that you're connecting to in Tableau, you kind of have the boundless potential for what you can gain in terms of insights from your data. However, in the world where maybe that data is not quite as clean, there's maybe some issues in trying to attain the information you need, you end up with what would typically be your extract load transform in your warehouse actually being quite a lot of transform happening in your BI layer. With very complex data source pages in the world of Tableau, if you're familiar with Tableau, and almost producing data marts in your workbooks themselves. And obviously what we're trying to say here is there's a world where you really want to move that transformation upstream, centralize it, govern it centrally, and then have your BI tool just connect to very nice, clean data sources. So something we're very passionate about. We want to ensure that the data is in a great state, it's modeled well for the business, for the industry they work in, and so that we can either support them downstream with their analytics and send our specialists in to help them once the data's in the right place. So moving on then, so what we've spoken about, the idea that we're partnered with Snowflake and Fivetran, that's like the warehouse and the ingest. So why did we choose DBT as the transformation tool? So there's a few bullet points here I just want to walk through, just kind of high level to kind of give you an understanding of why we think this is such a powerful tool. And then I'll probably dive a bit deeper in the next slide, just to kind of go into some more specifics about being a consultant in the data engineering space, and again, why DBT is very useful. So here I'll just kind of give it a quick visual as to how easy it would be to set up your environments in your warehouse. So DBT by default kind of guides you into this really nice sort of consistent way of working when you're developing projects. You can have multiple data engineers all executing models in DBT, even hitting the same database target, and by default it'll kind of prefix that particular developer's username to any schema that they're pushing to in the development environment. And obviously, as you move up the stack, as you progress your developments into UAT and prod, you can then drop those prefixes. But this is all kind of by default when you're creating models in DBT, how they're materialized in your warehouse. It does add the particular developer's username, which we find very useful. It's great for collaboration. A big element of DBT, it's open source, which I think does wonders for the world of building a data community. Alex has already mentioned about the incredible community that Tableau has, the knowledge base, the data viz challenges they do each week, and in the world of DBT, being able to have an open source tool that people can get their hands on easily, and really start to build upon those foundations that DBT provide. And so one of these things that comes from a great community is obviously the creativity that comes with it, and that is the packages that some of the DBT packages that exist today are fantastic. One of the ones that we use quite a lot is DBT Vault, to help build your data vault models. And so this is just an ever-growing community of people really trying to define the best practice of how you model specific warehouse solutions, and then having that level of consistency across everyone using DBT is just great especially for a consultant, where you're sort of jumping from one client to another. If they're building the same kind of model, if they're building a data vault, it's great to know if they're using the same packages. You can kind of become very familiar very quickly. And so very, very much a fan of the open source model. This is kind of based quite a lot on my personal experience, but as I've been in the data engineering field, I find this quite an interesting point to make, and how DBT I think is kind of advantage in this space. So I don't know about those of you in the call, but typically speaking, and from an educational standpoint, there doesn't seem to be a clear pathway going from education to data engineer. You kind of fall in one of two camps as you progress your career, which would be maybe your computer science, and so you're very familiar with like programming and coding practices and that kind of typical development cycle. Whereas maybe then through that process, you find yourself working in the world of data. On the other hand, you've got maybe the likes of those that have moved more into the analytics space, using Tableau and other BI tools, and maybe over the years have been putting their hair out, connecting to particularly messy data, and just want to get their hands on it, understand the best way to build data. And typically that's through the use of SQL, and then they become more, I guess, in the fold of the data engineering space. And so you've got like these two camps that kind of merge into this world of data engineering. And I find that DBT is a great home for both those people. DBT is kind of like a codified way of using SQL. So you have the familiarity of a fairly easy to use scripting language, but also done and developed in a way that is very familiar to developers in typical sort of like agile sprint cycles. So being able to use DBT in your favorite IDEs, such as like VS Code, making sure it's bound to a version control system, such as GitHub and GitLab. I think this is just a great space for people coming from those very common pathways into the world of data engineering. And then finally, I mentioned that DBT is like quite a guiding hand here. So it's a sandbox, you know, it's open source. You can overwrite and do much of whatever you want really in the space. I mentioned before about people building packages on top. There really is a lot of creativity here. However, I find the documentation that DBT provide, and also how you initialize a project when you first start a DBT project, there's very much this guidance on you have this kind of model directory structure. You know, your model should be listed in the model folder. Your DBT project YAML is always a great starting point when you're inspecting an existing DBT project to see exactly how certain models being materialized. And so you just have a level of consistency right off the bat, even if you're not familiar with the tool, it's your first project. Again, I find this very useful as a consultant working with different industries and how they use their data, to know if they use DBT, that this is going to be a familiar thing I walk into when I support them. A bit of a deeper dive then. So one thing that myself and Paul and the team we come across a lot is we're working with clients, kind of helping them with their data journey. It might be that we're helping more than one client simultaneously. So being able to jump from one DBT project to another, obviously we need this to be seamless, and it's the fact it's sort of a codified way of doing data transformation. You can also make use of other programming tools. So using DBT in like the CLI, using it in VS Code. I can also make use of Python environments. This is great. So having a virtual environment to isolate my different projects when I'm supporting clients means I don't have to worry about version conflict. Another very specific scenario I'm going to put up now for maybe some of those that are more familiar with DBT. You might find that when working with DBT, that the first project you do, you often have your profiles YAML that stores your connection details to your warehouse, very often has the default namespace. And so anyone that's worked with DBT knows that your profiles YAML can only have unique names of namespaces. And we've found quite often that working with different clients, they all seem to have default as a namespace. So one thing you can do, again, making use of the fact this is kind of a codified way of doing transformation, DBT allows you to kind of set and reset the global path for where DBT should look for that profiles YAML. Again, very specific scenario, but just a great example of how flexible it can be when developing with multiple different DBT projects. Modularity and inheritance, I think, again, because it's such a codified way of doing transformation, I find this incredibly flexible, but also, again, it's guided well. So I've given an example here of what is a macro that exists in any DBT project. They generate schema name. There's also a generate database name. These get called under the hood, but you can overwrite them. You can change their behaviors. In fact, in the previous slide, I kind of showed an example about collaboration, about how you can push to different environments, so different databases in your warehouse. This is just an example of a macro I use to kind of change that behavior. So when developers are pushing to a development environment, it's how it handles that schema name with their username versus when I push to a UAT or production environment. So the fact that this kind of happens by default, but you can also be given the flexibility to overwrite and change how these macros work, I think is fantastic. Inheritance as well. So this is very powerful. So whenever I approach a client and the first thing I look at is their DBT project YAML, just trying to get an understanding of how their project is built, how it's configured. Seeing that certain subdirectories in their models folder, they might have it so everything gets materialized as a view in their warehouse. It's obviously very quick to see that in the project YAML, but it doesn't stop you from having bespoke configurations within that same project folder. So the fact you can have like these config blocks in each model, I think, is incredibly useful, because you're not bound or restricted as to how you materialize your models in your warehouse. There's always a way that you can overwrite, and it just works on a hierarchy basis. So whatever you define at one level, there'll be a level below that you can maybe overwrite how the behavior of that model is working. I think that's fantastic. Again, with all of the tools, I've gone a bit specific here, and some of the descriptions I've got of why I think DBT is great for us as a consultant company and great for our clients. I think the culture of DBT as well is worth pinning up here. So they very much have been impressive to us for kind of pioneering best practices. The way they do automated documentation is fantastic. It's clean, it's consistent. The fact it's both visual as well as kind of like tabular and defined as well in generated HTML docs that you can either host in DBT Cloud or host yourselves in your own stack. I think it's fantastic. They're kind of helping data teams across the span of both sort of analytics all the way upstream to data owners, being able to have this universal layer of documentation of what exists in your warehouse. The fact that it's so easy to generate is incredibly powerful. And then this other side of the DBT culture as well, which I'm very fond of, is about defining data responsibility. It can be difficult when you're starting out and you're building out your data estate and how you want it to look, just to understand as you scale up and grow who is responsible for what. And this is a diagram I use quite often just to kind of help understand and isolate some of those responsibilities. albeit it's quite specific to the idea of a data vault setup in the middle. But just in terms of those groups that sit around this model, you've got obviously that relationship between data owners and engineers. That's very important. So, you know, for the engineer's perspective, like what data exists and any questions about why it exists, that could be a good relationship there between the owners and the engineers. But this whole thing about analytics engineer that Alex touched on as well, this is something that DBT have very much been advocates for, and the tools they provide in the world of DBT makes this whole process incredibly easy. So, and it may be depending on the size and scale of your team. Your data engineer may also be your analytics engineer, but in that sense, it's having that relationship with your downstream analysts, those that are domain specific, that have the domain specific knowledge. They know what insight they want to gauge out of their business's data. Having analytics engineer work with them to understand what data they want to get hold of, and then having that the kind of the best practices and the tools available from the likes of DBT to build out those views, so that someone who's a power user of Tableau can just get straight to the designing and getting the insights out of data, rather than having to worry about doing any form of transformation upon connecting to that data in the Tableau space. And then finally, again, another best practice thing that I think DBT are great for is this is just again another example actually of defining role responsibilities here. Alex mentioned about having a metrics layer, and again I think this is fantastic. This really kind of like leads and guides users of DBT, data engineers, into having these areas of I guess like aggregated and like metric driven business logic defined upstream in your warehouse. I think this is very important. Again, you're keeping one version of the truth. It's version controlled, and it just makes it easier for downstream of anyone using the likes of Tableau or other BI solutions. And then finally, testing. DBT makes testing incredibly simple. It's got built-in functions for doing some very common tests, testing for uniqueness, testing for not nulls. These are things that are very easy, as you can see here from this little snippet of YAML, to have these tests run as part of your everyday production runs of your DBT models. And I think testing is something that some tools don't guide you towards, and DBT does. And so it's something that we're always advocating and ensuring that testing is something that takes place. So that's kind of like a whistle-stop tour, quite high and low, jumping around in some of the level of detail as to why we've adopted DBT. And I think if there's any questions, there's probably the Q&A window for those to be answered. But that's me done. So Alex, I'll pass back to yourself.
Thank you, Carl, and thank you, Alan. So two more kind of activities. One is I'd like to do a quick poll whilst we've got the attention of this kind of group of people that have a shared interest in Tableau and DBT. So I'm just going to post a link in the chat. I'm going to share my screen so we can see the live results of this poll. And what I'm really keen to hear from you guys is what types of integration would you ideally want to see between Tableau and DBT? So I've put my thoughts down on paper here. Hopefully you can click on the poll in the chat and start to vote. Someone tell me if that link isn't working for any reason. I can see someone has voted, which is a good start. So whilst you're voting, let me just talk through my thinking behind potential integrations and what they might look like. The first is around metadata, and actually I've seen a question in the Q&A already about this. So we've heard a number of customers that would be very interested in surfacing metadata from DBT in the Tableau catalog. So that's something that we've certainly heard a few times already from organizations that are using both products together. The second idea that I had was automating the testing of database and DBT models to better understand how that might impact Tableau assets that exist downstream from those models. So if we are to make a change in the data warehouse or in a DBT model, what Tableau data sources and workbooks and dashboards might be impacted or break as a result of that change. The third idea I had was using this concept that DBT has called exposures. So exposures in DBT are a way of extending their DAG and their lineage information with further downstream assets like Tableau dashboards. So if you're familiar with the DAGs that exist in DBT, Carl showed a screenshot of one earlier, they have these special node types called exposures that show up in orange that allow third parties like Tableau to be part of that same DAG. So not only can you see the lineage in terms of all the transformations that happen in DBT, but you can also see those downstream assets as well and link them to them. The fourth idea I had was automatically generating Tableau data sources. I think this would be a bit harder from the Tableau perspective because we don't have APIs that easily lend themselves to this. But the idea here is, imagine you've built a DBT data model and it automatically spits out a Tableau data source with the appropriate joins and relationships inherited from how you define that in DBT. Similarly with metrics already exist in DBT, so you can define what those metrics look like in DBT, and potentially those could then surface in Tableau as a calculated field that implements the same logic that was implemented in that metric in DBT. And then the final idea I have, which is probably more of a roadmap item, is once DBT release DBT server and their metrics capability, allowing Tableau to delegate semantics to DBT. So rather than writing these calculated fields in Tableau, actually being able to push that logic into DBT and at runtime, live query those metrics that DBT is surfacing to third-party tools like Tableau. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully you follow some of those explanations as to the ideas I have for potential integrations. By the way, if you have other ideas, I would love to hear about those. Please message me. I'm on the DBT Slack channel. It's probably the easiest way for you guys to get hold of me if you have other ideas of potential integrations. But this is super interesting. We can already see that, yeah, number one is that metadata synchronization, which revalidates, I think, what we started to hear from our community. And again, that question was already asked in the Q&A today. So it's definitely a question that we're hearing from a number of our joint customers. Awesome. So again, thank you very much to all the presenters. At this point, we're going to try and go into our breakout sessions. So let me just switch back on my screen. If I can come out of full screen mode in the browser. Okay, so unfortunately, we've had a bit of a logistical challenge in that we're going to have to join a separate Zoom meeting for the breakouts. So I'm going to paste the link now, and my colleague Greg Komandouris is going to help to put you into a room and allocate the rooms. But the idea in this next 25 minutes or so is it's an opportunity for you guys, whether you are a partner, a vendor, a customer, for you guys to meet your peers who are interested in Tableau and DBT and start talking about some of the topics you've heard today. So start by introducing yourselves, connect to each other on LinkedIn or on the DBT Slack, whatever's easiest. Maybe talk about the data stack that you're currently using. So yes, you might have Tableau and DBT. What cloud data warehouse are you using? What extract and load tools are you using? What other BI tools are you using as part of your data stack? Talk about best practices and challenges. So Alan covered a lot of this earlier. I was nodding along to a lot of what he was saying, but it was really interesting to hear about some of the best practices and challenges that Alan spoke about at Tails. This concept of like, how much modeling do we do in Tableau versus DBT? How do we reduce complexity? Do we have enough people in our data team to support the types of initiatives or the types of data strategy that we want to use for our data pipelines? And then the third point I'd love you guys to discuss is around this integration. So we've just done a quick poll. I'd love you to discuss that amongst yourselves. You know, what types of integration would you be excited to see? What else would you want to see? How would you envisage those potential types of integration working? So just some ideas and recommendations for discussion points in the breakout rooms. So at this point, I'm just going to paste the Zoom link, and I hope to see everyone on the other side. The recording is now going to stop as well. So for anybody that's watching this retrospectively, we're going to stop recording at this point, but please click on the link in the chat and go ahead and join the breakout rooms. Thank you very much, everyone. I'll see you on the other side.